So I think we are ready to start, are we? Yes. Okay. So gladly, but also a bit sad, I welcome you to our last lecture within that first series of lectures of International Campus Waldorf. And as I said before to Sven, I'm very much pleased that he is doing the last lecture. So it's a guarantee that this will be a good one, and we have a good memory of that wonderful time we spent together. So just saying that in the beginning, I'm very happy that you do the final stone in that wonderful building we tried to build in this autumn term. I would like to say something before I introduce Sven, and just let you know, because many people might have known him, that my colleague Dirk Randol from Alanus University passed away last week, suddenly, out of a sudden. Some kind, we don't know exactly, it's connected to the heart. And I just want to mention that because he did a lot of research, empirical research around Waldorf. I would say he's a pioneer of an empirical turn within research on Waldorf education. He did alumni studies, he did teacher studies, he did student studies. So empirical work around Waldorf is very much connected to his name. He built up a network worldwide with international researchers. So his methods, and he's focused on quantitative empirical studies. His methods has been applied in other countries, in Israel, in New Zealand, in the US, in Denmark, Brazil. So in many countries, this kind of research, this, so to speak, empirical turn did a lot for the reception of Waldorf education in the public. And many of his books, I think they are translated too. So just to say that, that he passed away last week, and he, for Alanus especially, and for the Waldorf world, he has done a very, very fine job, which is very much important for the reception of Waldorf and also for the academic standing of Alanus University. Just have said that, I now would like...
What's his name?
Dirk Randol.
Okay.
Maybe you can put it in the chat, Katharina. Dirk Randol. He's been a co-worker of Software AG Foundation, so it was always a bit of a double function, doing research on the one hand and supporting our work on the other hand, financially with the help of Software AG Foundation. Yes, and now I would like to turn to Sven Saar. He is, I think, one of the most experienced Waldorf teachers we can imagine, being a Waldorf class teacher, a high school teacher for 30 years right now. He got his training from Witten and has been since then class teacher and high school teacher for history, English, and drama. And he has two places where he comes from Germany originally, but mainly now he's in England. And in England, he's responsible for teacher training in 2 places. And furthermore, due to COVID, but he has a very much an international online presence. So he is giving advice to Waldorf schools, and he's teaching in many countries of the world, Waldorf training centers. I'm very happy to have you here today, Sven. And the topic of his lecture will be the child's learning experience. So Sven, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. You'll see halfway through my talk, while telling me that the stage is mine, has a particular resonance for me. So thank you, first of all, for the great honor to be allowed to stand on the shoulder of these 24 giants that came before me. It's really special to be allowed to do the last lecture. And seeing that the framework for this series is teacher education, I thought I'd maybe start with my own experience. I received my teacher education in Witten at a time that might have been considered the heyday of Waldorf. Alongside me were about 450 students, all in the same institution. And I learned to tell stories, to do drama, to sing, to draw on blackboards, modeling clay figures. It was just so rich. And I think for the rest of my life, I will be grateful for that teacher education experience nourishing things in me that I never knew existed up to that point. I started as a very young man, and it completely unlocked me as a person, what I experienced there. So on the back of that really positive, wonderful 4 years, I couldn't wait to step into the classroom. And there I was with my rucksack packed with brilliant ideas and great skills and charismatic storytelling. And there I stood in front of a horde of adoring, grateful children. If only, yeah. You won't believe this, but there were some children who were not enthusiastic about what I brought. In fact, I might have to go so far as to say that some children were positively disinterested in what I had to offer. And among that was a large subject section that behaved as if they were bored. And among those was a subsection of children that were so bored that they began to disturb my lessons. And so after only a few weeks, I found myself saying that sentence that is probably the sentence I'm most ashamed of. But I'm afraid it wasn't the last time I said that sentence. And the sentence is, "How dare you disturb my lesson?" And I wish somebody had heard me through the door and taken me by the hand afterwards and said, "You know what you said earlier on in front of your children? Just examine that a little bit. Let's talk about what that means about your perspective. Because is it really your lesson? Is that what you're here for? To stand there and have children take part in your lesson? And do you experience it as a personal insult when they don't? Then maybe we need to have a conversation about this." Well, that didn't happen. I was allowed to continue in this narcissistic way for far too long, and I will carry that as a responsibility to my grave and beyond, probably, that I didn't wake up in time. So today I'd like to talk about the child's perspective in that experience. And Trevor Mepham said in a conversation last week that teaching only takes place when learning occurs, which sounds like a commonplace, but if you've been in so many schools and classrooms as I have, you realize that it's not second nature to many who share this profession, and it wasn't to me for a long time. So for most of the time, I will be sharing slides with you. If that irritates you to some extent, you probably know that you can adjust the size of that and make the slides smaller. So feel free to use that in any way you see fit. Good, I think you can probably see that now. I would like to begin by talking briefly from a British perspective. As you probably have heard, the schools in Britain are still in the middle of an existential crisis. This crisis is partly of our own making, but is also the result of what I might call a hostile focus of the government on all its schools. We have an organization called Ofsted, which is charged with maintaining the standards of schools. And it does so by regularly inspecting schools and assuming that they won't be any good unless they can prove otherwise. And the way schools prove to Ofsted that they are good is by supplying significant data that proves that the children are engaging with their learning experience. Ofsted then divides schools into 4 categories: inadequate, requires improvement, good, and outstanding. And you will probably notice that there is no category called satisfactory, because good enough is something that has disappeared from our catalog of categories. And as a result, this presence within the educational life in the UK has led to a substantial increase in mental illness among teachers, stress and fear, which of course has consequences for the children in their care as well. So this affects Waldorf schools, but it affects all the schools in this country and all the teachers in this country. And it shows a little bit gives a little bit of a flavor of the culture in which we operate. But there is no crisis so dark that it does not also carry an opportunity. And for us in the UK, this hostile focus has been the opportunity to reassess from point zero everything that we do and reinvent some of it quite radically. One of the things that I'd like to point you towards, which I feel very pleased about actually as a process, is that the Steiner Schools Fellowship in the UK has created something called the National Steiner Waldorf Teaching Standards. Katharina will put that we'll put a link to that in the chat. And this is basically 45 articles about professional conduct of Waldorf teachers. And there's a little series we've created to make that continuous professional development within schools. So to bring that into the conversation, what does it mean to be a professional Waldorf teacher? But other things have come out of that as well that have been surprisingly helpful. One of these is the 3 I's. Those of you who are familiar with mainstream education will be no stranger to these 3 words. Every Ofsted inspector is asking about this. What is your intention? How do you implement your plan? And how do you measure the impact of your education? And they expect you to have satisfactory answers to all those 3 questions. And what happened when we were inspected, Waldorf schools were inspected, that we were pretty good on the first 2 and not very good at all on the 3rd. And if you remember what I said at the beginning of the talk about my own teacher education experience, you can see why. We were educated to understand where we are coming from in terms of our educational mission, and to be very bright and imaginative when it comes to organizing our classroom experience, but to then check and find out in a systematic way whether the children are actually learning. That's where we've fallen down. And I will put some focus on that this evening, if you don't mind, because that's been a real eye-opener for me, how incomplete the Waldorf experience is without that final important step. But let's begin in proper order and look at intention first. So we could ask ourselves, well, what is education for? Why is that a thing at all? And you can do 3 things with education, I think. The first of all, you can create subjects. So this kind of photograph would have been familiar to anyone who was Steiner's contemporary. Yeah? In centuries, people in power needed people to fight for them and not ask how and why, but just do as they were told. And of course, you can create a society like that through education by putting children in uniforms, by giving them numbers, by suggesting to them that their individuality doesn't matter. So that way you will create subjects through education. Slightly more elegantly, but ultimately just as limiting, is using education to create believers. So the Soviet system was like that. The Jesuits believed in this, but also modern madrasa Islamist schools do this. You deliberately limit the horizon of the pupils you teach, so that when it comes to you needing to manipulate them, you don't even have to give them orders, because they will do as you want them to just by themselves, because they believe in the same things that you do. And you don't even need to threaten them with anything. So that's the second. And as you can see, both those are really easy to reject. Well, that's not us, is it? Modern society, Western values, we believe in creating winners. We believe in a culture of outstandingness and excellence. We want every child to be a winner. Well, I don't know if you can read the language of that photograph. What you see here are the hands of the team who have just won the Football World Cup. And just read the body language of those hands. Are those happy hands? Don't forget, these are winners' hands. They've got the fight behind them, but look at them. And even if you ignore this, if you consider for the moment that these are the hands of 1 out of 32 teams. If there's one team the winner, then 31 teams are the losers. And the problem with following this narrative to our children is twofold. On the one hand, we say to our children, it's okay. In fact, it's desirable to be better than everyone else around you. So that's hardly a recipe for social peace. And secondly, we're saying to them, if this is your aim, then obviously if you don't achieve that aim, you're a loser. So aiming to be a winner leaves you a very, very narrow definition of what success means, doesn't it? So not only is it a recipe for social disaster, it's a recipe for personal disaster. Yeah, you're not going to achieve inner harmony if you're striving to be a winner. So we're not doing that either. So what do Waldorf schools do? What do we want to create? Well, I think we create an environment in which the human being, let's put it really simply, can be happy. Period. With all that implies, with all the developmental aspects and everything, yes, but happiness, please, harmony, peace, all those things. So the human being follows their true intention, You've hopefully seen a copy of this book, and maybe you even own one of them. This is the new version of Steiner's first teacher's course, translated into English. The German book has 900 pages. Look at the English one. 45 lectures in this neat little book that fits into your pocket. And I tell you one thing, it's written like a book for the 21st century. It doesn't feel like it's 100 years old. And it's so brilliant, not least because in the first lecture, Steiner actually tells us what education is for. He draws a picture, not with chalk on the blackboard, but with words. Essentially, there are two directions. We have a generic part, an earthly part, and a spiritual part to ourselves. And the task of the human being is to bring those two together. Not the teacher's task. The child's task is to bring those two together. The teacher provides, as I said, the environment in which the child can do that. So we incarnate our spiritual part, the universal individual part, that beautiful paradox, into the generic part, the given and specific part of ourselves. Our gene pool, our language, our class, our culture, all that kind of thing that is already there. And what happens when we do that? Well, our spirit and our body meet, and our soul resides in the middle. Our soul, which is part spirit and part body. And of course, that process doesn't finish, does it? It doesn't finish in our school time. It goes on and on and on until the day we die. Yeah, and then it gradually comes out again. And in that process, what happens to our soul? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger because the amount of agency increases that it has. So 3 directions here, really. Incarnation of the universal into the generic. Emancipation of that again, out again, because we don't want to define ourselves through generic things. And in the middle of all that is our experience. That's where we are at home. There are all sorts of things, you see, about the spirit that we are not aware of. There's all sorts of things, thank God, about our physical nature that we're not aware of. But in the middle, that's where we are at home. That's where the child is at home. This is where the child experiences agency. Here I can do something. I can make a difference. And to let that area grow bigger and bigger and bigger, that is the task of each human being. And our task as teachers is to allow that to happen, to enable the child for that to happen. So let's have a look at how we do that. That's the intention. Right at the beginning of the first teacher's course. Let's have a look at how we implement that. So how does Waldorf does his magic? Well, surely like this. We've got this brilliant thing called the Waldorf curriculum. And let me put this straight away, I don't disagree with anything on this list, okay? I'm not dissing this. There's lots of wisdom that has gone into this picture. Problem is, once I write it down, it's fixed. And the content of the Waldorf curriculum becomes the curriculum. What do you do in class 5? Well, you do ancient civilizations. You do sentence structures. You do decimal fractions. That's not really a definition or even a characterization of education, is it? That's just the means to an end. And it's a bit problematic when that becomes cast in stone, because also, is this really true for every child in every country? And was it true in the 1960s? And is the same thing still true in the 2020s? Surely there's got to be more than that. And I love the recent development in this field. Look, so the question really is, are we asking the right question? This is a whole different field, but I don't personally believe that tradition is a friend of the Waldorf teacher. I think tradition is something to wake us up to our practice and allow us to reinvent our practice if necessary. It doesn't always have to happen. So on the left of this picture, you see from my bookshelf the version of the German Lehrplan. Insufficiently, I have to add, translated as curriculum. This version has 700 pages. The one that is just about to be published has about 1,000 pages. Then 20 years ago, Martin Rawson wrote for Britain, not for the English-speaking world, but for Britain, the so-called Yellow Book. That then had 220 pages. And look at the most recent curriculum document, Waldorf Education for the Future. This came out of our review in the UK. Kath Bransby and Martin Rawson, 45 pages. There is zero content in this document. It's all about where we're coming from, how we are working, and how we assess what we're doing. But it doesn't mention geography, it doesn't mention maths, it doesn't mention foreign languages, because the same principles apply to all of those subjects. And that gets interesting. And you think 45 pages is short? Well, I can go further. I can reduce it to 3 words with the help of the Dutch educationalist Gert Biester. I hope I've said his name correctly. Biester wrote a book in 2014, which she called The Beautiful Risk of Education. And in it, he reduces the gesture of the curriculum to 3 words, these 3 words. Everything we do needs to serve these 3 aims, if you like. Socialization relates to what we have around us and our embedding ourselves in it. So arriving in our environment. Individuation is about getting to know who we are, what we like and what we don't. If, for example, our teachers force us to all the time do the same thing, we will never allow ourselves to decide, I like music better than science. I like the violin better than the guitar. And if I don't find out who I am and what I like, then I also don't understand who you are and what you like. And then I walk through the world thinking everybody thinks and feels like me. And when I become American president with that kind of mindset, then the world has a problem. And what is the tool for all this? Well, it's qualification. It's through the things I learn, through the skills I acquire, the knowledge I built up. That's how I learn to socialize and to individuate. And this is why the same picture that Steiner uses is also applicable for Biester's ideas. Yeah? Because this is where the two meet. They meet in the school experience. This by getting more and more able, becoming more and more able as a learner, this means that I develop agency as a person. Okay, so this is what these modern thinkers want us to do. Please implement that. Let's look for a moment at where that happens. I wonder if you could, this isn't directly interactive, but maybe could you do me the favor and imagine for a moment a bird's eye view of a classroom. What does a classroom look like from above? Just going to give you 5 seconds to do that for a moment. Now, this is probably not applicable to all of you, but I imagine that many of you imagine something like this. And the question I would like to ask is this a learning environment? Is this a learning arena? Well, for some pupils, yes. But it's a learning arena that divides the pupils into privileged and disabled ones. The privileged ones sit right here at the front. They have access to the teacher. If you're sitting in the middle row, your access to the teacher is already compromised. And if you're sitting in the back row, then you've got to be lucky that all the things that might distract you from that don't get in the way. You're a third-class citizen, so to speak, because everything is predicated on the magic that unravels at the front. This is not a classroom. This is an auditorium. It's an auditorium for the sage on the stage. And I'm sitting back here and I'm watching that beautiful person at the front who I love so much do their best to reach me. But can she? Can she reach me in such a way that she actually notices me with all her teaching that she's doing there at the front? Or will she at some point exasperatedly say to me and my classmates, will you stop spoiling my lesson? You probably know what follows the words, the sage on the stage. It's an oldish cliche now to say, no, we don't want to be the sage on the stage. We want to be the guide by your side. I knew that phrase already when I had a bit of an epiphany one day, and that's where this little map comes from. I was on a canoe trip 3 or 4 years ago with a class of pupils, and it was on the River Wye, which forms the border between England and Wales. And we got into the river in our canoes in a little town called Ross, and we left it again in a slightly bigger town called Monmouth. And as I was paddling along, because you spend hours doing that with nothing very much interesting happening, my thoughts drifted and they arrived at an interesting place, because I thought I could actually use this river as a metaphor for the biographical journey of the child and my role in it. How about let go of the canoe image for a moment and think of the child as a swimmer and the river and the sea as their life. So the child comes swimming down the river, and I, the class teacher, I'm standing by the shore in Ross on Wye. And they're coming swimming towards me. And I don't have to teach them to swim. They can already do that. They're not very good at it, but they can swim. They don't drown yet. So I get into the river with them, and now we swim together. And the first year or two of this journey will be spent in me making sure the child doesn't drown, keeping them safe, keeping them secure, keeping them confident. And as they get more confident, and as they get more independent in staying on the water, I can point out things on the bank to them. I can explain about the chemical makeup of the water. I can explain about how swans reproduce and breed their young. I can explain about the stinging nettles and the things that overhang the river. We can test how long we can stay underwater. We can dive down and touch the bottom, so we can get really good at this. We can try and swim against the current together. Whatever we do, I will leave the river in Monmouth. The child doesn't. The child carries on swimming. My role is done. I'll wave bye-bye, hopefully friendly, and I'll never see them again. Their journey continues down the river with the occasional guide swimming alongside for much shorter than I did. And by the time they get to the sea, they're on their own. Now, what have they learned from me? For the rest of their swimming life, I play no active role anymore. But that time between Ross and Monmouth, that was a significant time. Did I prepare them for the future part of their journey? And did I then let go? Because that was all I was there for, the guide by their side. You see, in order to do that, I really have to step off the stage. And if I step off the stage, I might find myself in a classroom like this one. Many of you know this as a very archetypal image of something we call the moving classroom. And quite often it is very badly misinterpreted in my view as something that you do with little children, class 1, 2, and 3. You've got lovely cushions and you've got all these nice things. I think that's selling ourselves far too short. This is the best invention I've ever come across as an innovation in Waldorf, because it expresses what I believe to be an eternal truth. We are all learning together. Don McAllis said that during their school time, the child needs to become a master in the art of learning. So this learning experience is something I facilitate as a primus inter pares, or a prima inter pares, a first among equals. The cross in the middle of the circle here, that's the lesson content. That could be a real lesson content, like a scientific demonstration, but it could be metaphorical as well. It doesn't really matter. The key thing is that every child has similar access to it. There are no privileged people in this classroom. Occasionally, we'll go back into rows when we have to copy things from the blackboard, sure. But the default position is one where we all have equal access, and that changes things. That makes a difference when you begin to think of yourself really deep down as a guide and not a sage anymore. So let's go from where we learn to how we learn. I loved Wilfried Sommer's elegance last week when he talked for an hour about the 3-stage rhythm without ever mentioning the words conclusion, judgment, and concept. I thought that was inspired. And maybe just to bring back the 3 words to you that he did use, he talked about a shared encounter with the content, with the world, then about aligning ourselves with that content, and finally, changing our perspective. And because I promised you that we were going to look at this from the child's perspective, let's do that for a moment. So we have conclusion, judgment, and concept, lecture 9, first teacher's course. Translated into classroom practice, I would say we provide an experience to the child. Then we place that experience in context. And finally, the child owns it. A concept is something I carry around with me without even knowing that I carry it, so that I can then apply it to future conclusions and put them into context. So from the child's perspective, this is, I experience something, we all move it around, and then it becomes mine. It's mine now. It's no longer, doesn't belong to the teacher anymore. So let's translate that, just like Wilfried Sommer did, into a class 1 letter learning experience. We tell the story about Sleeping Beauty. And on the next day, this picture arrives on the blackboard, and the picture shows the proud prince on his prancing pony, cutting through the prickly roses to rescue their pretty princess. And because I've read my anthroposophical secondary literature, I know, of course, that this is a beautiful, very significant image. This is not about a pretty girl in a tower. This is about the adolescent soul and the approaching eye. This is noble human development. And I've suffused myself with that idea. I know exactly why I'm telling this story. I've told it beautifully yesterday. And here we are. And now I'm very imaginative. I say to the children, p, 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 and they say p, 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 back. And I give each of them a little bit of flour on their hand, and they can all go p, 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 until the flour is all gone. And then we find words that begin with p, and words that have a p in the middle, and words that have a p at the end. And then I say to them, now, dear children, now you're allowed to write down as many words as you can that start with p, that end with p, and that have the p in the middle. Because the p is not the first letter. They already know quite a few letters. And so they all get their main lesson books out and they start to write. And it gets really quiet in the classroom. And in one corner of the classroom, I hear some children are beginning to giggle. And the giggle gets a little bit on the loud side, and I notice there's doing something, and all the children that are sitting in that corner are sort of looking at one particular girl's main lesson book. I think, something's going on back there. I wonder what that is. So I discreetly make my way around, but one of them spots me and they go, Mr. Saar's coming, Mr. Saar's coming. And they try and sort of hide the page. But I say, no, it's okay. Let me see what you've written. And she opens the page. This, ladies and gentlemen, is education towards freedom. Job done. Hopefully I'm old enough and experienced and wise enough to not punish that girl or tell her off, because she's done exactly what she needed to do. She's taken my proud prince and she turned him into poo and penis, because now the p belongs to her. That's exactly what I wanted. It's no longer my p, it's her p. And that begins in class 1. Education towards freedom is not the aim of Waldorf education. It's the practice of Waldorf education. That's what we do. So let's have a look at this word curriculum for a moment. Those of you who had the opportunity to watch Neil Boland's talk will have heard him quote the 3 types of curriculum that don't usually get mentioned. And I found it so good, I thought I'd repeat that. He talks about the hidden curriculum, which is all the things that happen unintentionally in school, but still have an educational effect on the child. Then he mentions the null curriculum, which is all the things that we don't teach and the child misses out on. And finally, he refers to the saber-tooth curriculum, which is a wonderful image for all the things that we proudly teach the children, but which are utterly useless to them. So in a way, Martin Rawson puts it very neatly when he says curriculum is everything that has an educational effect on children. The color of the classroom, the grace we say at lunchtime, the way they line up for break when they go out, all that is curriculum, because all that teaches children something. And here it's where Biester's 3 big words come back, you see? Socialization, qualification, individuation. And I love that little phrase, learning situations are arranged. Because when I first became a teacher, and admittedly I was too young, I thought it was my task to deliver content, because that's what my teachers had done. No. My task is to arrange learning situations. And in this universe, the guide is actually more important than the guidebook. So when Wolfgang Held, I don't know if you know who he is, he edits the Goetheanum Wochenschrift. When he says there is no such thing as Waldorf education, but there are 40,000 Waldorf teachers, that's what he's alluding to. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. The guide is more important than the guidebook. So this is about implementation. And now let's have a look at the impact itself. So how do I know whether what I do with the children actually arrives where it's supposed to go? This is essential to do, you know, because all my planning only makes sense if it is based on what has already arrived. If I decide in grade 4 to teach fractions, and I haven't assessed before I do that whether the children know how to factorize and know their times tables, I will not only create chaos, I will create trauma. You can have a child in class 4 who thought up to this point that they were quite good with numbers. And then you introduce fractions before assessing whether they actually know their tables properly. And they see simplify 27 here and 45 there. And they don't know what those two numbers have in common. And they think, okay, well, in that case, math is not for me anymore. And they stop trying. And that's a tragedy. And it's so easily avoided by making sure that I only plan those kind of lessons that make sense to the children. Yeah, comprehensibility, Martin Rosen calls it. So let's have a look for a moment with this example, because it's something everyone can relate to, I think. There are 3 levels at which we learn, and let's use times tables as an example for that. So there's surface learning, which is the easiest to assess. So I teach something to you in a certain way. Can you repeat it back to me? So if I've taught you that Canberra is the capital of Australia, then all I have to say to you is, what's the capital of Australia? And you say Canberra back to me, and I give you the thumbs up. Yeah, that's surface learning. So you can recite the times table up and down, let's say 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and so on. Deep learning is the evidence that you have taken this to another level. So if I ask you, what are the factors of 42? And you can, after a very brief pause, say 2, 3, not 4, 6, 7, 14, 21. Then the times tables have arrived at your deep learning level. Yeah. It's sustained learning. And that's not all. There's another level. When I then come in with a big tray bake of cake, because it's somebody's birthday, and I put it on the table and I say, well, there's 24 of us. How do we cut this cake? And the child says, well, there's more than one possibility. We can cut it 3 times this way and 8 times that way. Or we can cut it 4 times this way and 6 times that way. There's another one, says the child. We can cut it 6 times this way and 4 times that way. That's the same. No, it's not the same. Now that is transferable learning, you see. This is what Biester calls qualification. I've taught them a skill, and now they can use that skill to socialize, to arrive, to feel at home with their cake and their friends and all this kind of thing. So when I do any kind of assessment, I need to look at, is the mechanism the right one to assess each style of learning, if you like. So let's look at testing for a moment. The first thing I'd like you to, if that's okay with you, I'd like to ask you to put something in the chat. So would you mind very much writing in the chat the grade in which you would start systematically testing pupils? Having said that, I just realized I can't even see the chat, but do it anyway. So, because you all can, in which grade do you start systematically testing pupils? Not assessing, testing. So that they know there's a test. Just give you a minute to do that. To some extent, it doesn't even matter very much that I right now can't see the answers, because I'm not going to say which is the right or the wrong age. That's not really what it is about. But you've all used an inner mechanism to decide that, haven't you? And it's really interesting to go back to that place and ask yourself, what were my parameters just now? What did I base that opinion on, or that decision? And let's take this one step further. By testing the children, what are you actually after? What are you hoping to learn? What is it for? And because it is part of the curriculum experience of the children, it also needs to have a benefit for them. So what are they getting out of this particular test? And does this test, is this an opportunity for you to find out what their shortcomings are? Or is it an opportunity for them to demonstrate their knowledge? To show you what they can do? You will write two very different tests, I think, depending on what you've decided there. So let's go there for a moment. We don't have time to go in detail in all of this, but I just want to give you a couple of examples, and this may be a little controversial, I don't know. The first thing I would do when I do a test, and I'm talking about 10 or 11-year-old pupils now, would be that on Thursday I will say, we're going to do a test on Monday. So right now, what I'd like you to do is to write down any kind of questions you would like to come in the test. Things that I could test you on meaningfully. Let's say it's the end of an astronomy, no, let's say class 5 and 6. Let's say it's the end of botany. Yeah, plant study. What should come in the test? So they all write down 2 or 3 questions and I take them home with me. And the next day, I hand those questions out. And I say, okay, group work. These are the questions that you suggested yesterday. Now work together to find the answers. So what are we doing? We're revising together. When the test then comes on the Monday, 2/3 of it or so will consist of the questions that the pupils have themselves developed. And I can hear my mother, who is a very traditional teacher, say, that's not a test, that's cheating. They'll know all the answers. And I will say, oh yeah, what's wrong with that? Exactly. What are we trying to do here? And the next thing is probably a little more controversial, because when I do a test with pupils, 9 times out of 10, I ask them to put their main lesson book on their desk so that they have it to look up the answers. And this was very controversial in my German school. My British colleagues didn't really have a problem with that. My German colleagues found that almost unbearable because they said, that's definitely cheating. You know, and I said, okay, well, in that case, explain to me what the main lesson book is for. Isn't it the case that the most important things that happen in our learning get written down in the main lesson book so that we have it as a reference book? And they say, well, yes, sure. I say, okay, well, when do we need access to a reference book? Well, when we don't know the answer. I say, exactly. For example, in a test. So this is exactly the situation we've created the main lesson book for. And this is exactly the situation when we're not allowing the children to use it. What's the message here exactly? So let's not be afraid to give our children positive messages about the agency of their learning. Let's not create a generation of people who are frightened of being tested, but a generation of people who are looking forward to the opportunity of demonstrating how much they've learned. Makes all the difference, I promise. I'm so unhappy that I didn't have a mentor who told me this 25 years ago. And that only actually my 3rd class really benefited from this new way of looking at things. And I do keep apologizing to pupils that I had in my first 2 classes. So there's another way, though, of looking at what impact our work with the children has. And it has nothing to do with knowledge and content now. This is the result, again, of Martin Rawson and Kath Bransby's work in the UK, because Ofsted wanted from us an effective way of assessing the pupils' engagement with their educational experience. And what Martin and Kath have done is to say, well, can we do that on our terms, please? And this is what they've created. Yeah, you will get this in a handout afterwards, so you don't have to photograph this or something. I think it's really good. There are 7 categories, of course. There have to be 7 categories. And look at what they're describing. How careful do children create their work? How is their relationship to concentration? How easy do they find it to show respect and kindness? How much self-confidence do they have? So there's 7 categories here. And on a regular basis, these 7 categories get assessed for each child. I'll show you how. It's called a point-in-time assessment. Different schools do this in different ways. Some schools do this once a month, some of them 6 times a year, but all of them do it regularly for every child. Normally it's the class teacher or class guardian, every age, class 1 to 12, who will take this record, and then this will form the basis of a class discussion, a class conference, if you like, with the subject teachers. Do you agree? Yeah. And what I love about this is that it's not judgmental. It's phenomenological. Do you do this often, or do you do this rarely? Not how good are you at this? Just how often do you demonstrate this particular area of your development? And what's maybe missing on this, which is why I need to mention it, is the word evidence. Some things are easy to evidence, the care in the main lesson book, for example. Other things I need to think about and maybe write down more often than I have done. How regularly children do this by writing down incidents, anecdotal things. So this is data, but this is good data. This is positive data, non-judgmental, phenomenological data, which is sustainable, and it can form the basis for child studies, for writing reports, for parents' conversations, without putting children into boxes, which is why I like it. And so for the final part of my talk, I want to talk a little bit about impact assessment that has nothing to do with data. And this is what happens in the evening when I sit down with the children, I almost said. Although, of course, I don't, because the children are just about on their way to bed at home, and I'm sitting at my desk. And I don't want to go into deep detail on this, because this is a whole talk in itself. But I want to focus on one particular thing. And that is the contemplation of my class or of my group of children that I do in the evening. Some teachers, I was among them, cultivate the habit of allowing the children to drift up into our consciousness and then engaging with them in that way. And the problem with that is that if you have a large class, like in a continental Waldorf school, it's really easy for children to not do that and for you to forget 5 or 8 of them, or not quite remember, have I done that one yet? So there's nothing Ahrimanic in sticking to a list, I think. I use the circle order in which we sit. You can use the alphabetic register order. It doesn't really matter, but the whole exercise in my practice only takes about 20 minutes because all I do is a check-in. And the check-in is just, how did you and I meet today? And with some children, that can be just a simple thing. Oh, I remember you called me over because the swing had stopped swinging and you called me over to give you a push. And that was a you and I meeting because I remember that you said thank you. I also remember that Philip asked me a question about the Spanish Armada, and I told him, I promised him that I would find out, and I haven't yet. So what I do at this point is I write Philip's name on a piece of paper on my desk and I move on to the next child. And so I go through all the children, and with Sandra had tears in her eyes when there was a chaotic moment in the class and I had to raise my voice. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, she's got tears in her eyes. I need to make sure that she's okay. And then I forgot. So I owe her something there. So I'm going to write Sandra's name on my list as well. And then I move on. So by the time I've prepared all my lessons and I come back to this, then I have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 names on my little list. And these are children to whom I owe something, where I have the feeling I need to go a little bit deeper. And this for me is the difference between contemplation and meditation. Now I really engage. And with Sandra, for example, through the process of engaging, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, that's not the first time this week. She's been really emotional recently, and that's not her style at all. What's going on there? So it's almost as if I've opened the door a little bit, and putting my foot on the threshold allows me to see all sorts of things in that landscape. So that is a real engagement now with those particular children. And then, of course, comes the night. And I have this image, and forgive me if it's a little bit flippant, that all the children are, of course, sleeping. So, you know, they're in the spiritual world right now. And they're kind of meeting in what you might call a karmic cafe, because they're not only linking up with their own intentions from pre-birth, they're also using their karmic connections to continue, in a social sense, the development of those intentions. And I'm coming a bit late to the party every night because, of course, I've stayed awake for much longer. And now I join the cafe. And they go, hello, Mr. Saar. And you know at which table there's a space free for me? It's those 4 or 5 children that were on my list. They're sitting together at the table and they're waiting for me. And they say, now, what have you got for us tomorrow? And I say, well, yeah, we're doing physics and I've got this and I've got that and I've got that. And then one of them says, you know what? I think I'm going to find that boring. Or another one says, if you do that, then I think it's going to get noisy in the classroom and I'll get upset. Can you look at that again? Because I hate it when it's noisy in the classroom. So I go, okay, well, I'll try. And so, you know, then we all go our different ways. And I wake up in the morning and I get on my bike and I cycle to school and I change my plan. I make a difference. I change something round, and it doesn't get noisy in the classroom because I've somehow got things the right way around again from the night before when I was too tired to think it all the way through. And it's this seeing of the children. That's not data. That's not quantifiable. And Ofsted will never understand that gesture, I think. Peter Lutzke, in his talk many months ago now, in this campus, he said, not feeling seen is one of the most damaging things for a child. And I think through this regular encounter at night, I can make sure that the child does actually feel seen. So I'm almost finished. I want to do something a little bit unusual now. I want to share a verse with you. And please don't think this forward of me. Of course, I know that many of you are much more experienced in Waldorf education than I am. And I'm probably carrying water to the sea, as they say in Africa, or coals to Newcastle, as they say in Britain. But there's something I particularly like about this verse. And again, you'll have it in the PDF of these slides later on. I only came across it about 20 years into my career. And it describes a journey. I used to use it for tuning my instrument for the evening contemplation. And the journey is of the children coming towards me, but they have a task to do. And already in the first paragraph, it says that they will face challenge and resistance on their path. Remember, it's their river journey, not mine. And then I'm answering this. I'm answering this difficulty therein. And I say, let my love sustain and warm you. Radiant thinking, tranquil feeling, healing will. That's my contribution to you. Why? Because you have a task that, rooted in the heights of spirit, remember this, working in the earthly realms, remember this, you may grow to serve the word. Not I. You have a task to do. And what is your task on the earth as spiritual beings? Enlightening minds, enabling love, strengthening the whole of existence. So when Martin Rawson says that in school the child's unconscious intentions meet the teacher's conscious ones, the child's intentions are only unconscious when they're awake, when they're on the earth. As spiritual beings, these are very conscious intentions. Yeah? These children come to the earth with a gift, with something to do. And they're expecting something from me. They're expecting from me that I know why I'm doing something, that I have good ways of doing that, and that I will make sure that they've arrived in whatever it is that we're doing. So I'm sure there must be one or two among you who've looked at these three eyes, as they're known in the mainstream in the UK, and realized, wait a minute, we've got three eyes too. And for me, this is the beautiful thing about this. Here comes somebody officious and wants me to demonstrate the three materialistic three eyes, and I can do that. In fact, they're not materialistic at all if I see their spiritual potential. Because the first eye, intent, is of course, comes to life because I receive inspiration for my work from understanding what it's for. I've had this wonderful teacher education that allows me to fill the implementation of what I do with imagery. And finally, impact assessment is about far more than data collection. It's about relationship and developing a really keen intuition for the being of the child and how it reveals itself. So this is deeply anthroposophical. Although it comes to me in the guise of a threatening inspector, I can respond like this, I think, and be professional about it. And so I'd like to finish by quoting Christoph Wiechert, if I may. But I'm not quoting Christoph from his talk in December. I'm quoting Christoph from 15 years ago. 15, I think it's 15, it might be 17 years ago. Christoph came to Michael Hall and to work with the teachers, and he gave a public lecture. And of course, you're here, Christoph, so I can speak to you directly. You said the following: when people say that Waldorf pupils don't fit into our modern world, I take it as a great compliment. It means that we have done a good job. I'll say that again. When people say that Waldorf pupils don't fit into our modern world, I take it as a great compliment. It means that we have done a good job. Which brings me to my last slide. I think this is the child's message to us. Don't educate me to fit into the world. Enable me to transform it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sven. That was really, really inspiring. Okay, so let's see in the chat. There's a first comment by Graham. Are you gonna speak, Graham?
That's fine. Thank you for inviting me to speak. But the work I'm doing with this is founded in Sven's very frank and wonderful opening remarks. For a brilliant talk. Thank you so much, Sven.
Okay. And Shane, you directed a message to me. Maybe you can speak too. This is a very crucial topic, I think you are addressing, about the princess who wants to be rescued by a prince. Maybe you can bring that.
Thank
Shane,
you. Yeah, I hope you can hear me okay. My computer is not.
Yeah, it's okay.
So yeah, I was inspired by your talk, Sven. Brilliant, loads of wisdom.
Oh, no, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I could just about make it out. Carry on, Shane.
Okay. Basically, the story of the pretty princess and the proud prince. I know it has a different meaning behind, but
Yeah.
it's time in Waldorf schools that we choose different stories.
Yes. Thank you so much for asking that question. It's a different topic, so I can't go into it as long as I would love to do. But yes, you're exactly right to ask that question. And I think the idea of archetypal or stereotypical images that we bring particularly to young children really needs examining very carefully. And there are stories I think that should frankly disappear, but I think it's more a case of adding other ones to them in order to make sure that we have a very balanced picture. And I'm very excited by this theme because next spring I'm about to publish my first book, which is about relationship education with Bund der Freien Waldorfschulen. And this is one of the key themes there, is what is it about Eurocentric, patriarchal imagery that we perpetuate in Waldorf schools, and what should our relationship to that be? I don't have answers to that yet, but it's totally important for us to have a conversation about that. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I just had a master examination, oral master examination, and the student wrote a master paper about heteronormativity at Waldorf schools.
Yeah.
And of course, it has that tradition. And so she herself is in a homosexual relationship and has a partner, and being a class teacher, it was so difficult for her the first time, even in the collegium, and then always telling stories about this heteronormativity in Waldorf schools. I think the time has changed, and we have to see how can we address that in an appropriate way, in an age-appropriate way, and that was the topic of her master work she did. Yeah, yes. And I'm very happy, Sven, that you addressed that topic too.
Mm-hmm. Maybe next year, when we carry on.
Yes, that has been one of our topics we were thinking of putting into the next series of lectures, the question of diversity in a broad sense, on diversity at Waldorf schools. Yeah,
that would be brilliant.
So, last opportunity for you to have questions.
Do you have an overview of the questions, or do you want me to dive in?
Yeah, people are totally amazed by what you did. So it's always thank you, thank you, thank you. So be a bit more critical, please.
Yes, you heard what he said.
The lecture was brilliant, we know it, but now we want to have the critical questions.
Well, Douglas asked a good question. Can you say a little bit more about testing using memorization? Does it ever have any use? It's a leading question, of course, because of course it does. When we learn this whole area that Biester calls qualification, knowledge acquisition, is of course very important. And sorry, just somebody needs to, thank you, mute themselves. But I think as a general thing, it's more important for some children than for others. I remember strongly that in around grade 6, it was very clear that when we were learning geography, different children were quite insistent on their different learning styles and needs being met. And there definitely were at least 2 or 3 children in my class who would not have forgiven me if I hadn't made them learn the European capitals. So that was their favorite bit about that 3-week period, is being able to stand in front of the class and answer every capitals question correctly. For other children, that didn't matter so very much, and I would put that under this, what Biester calls individuation. That's how I'm like as a learner. I like facts. I like to memorize things. And of course, early on, when the children are younger, but then I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, training memory has all sorts of positive connotations that go way beyond the actual stuff that we memorize.
Maybe there's something coming in from Nora, who says that she loved the way you presented the concepts of conclusion, judgment, and concept, and this could be transferred directly to foreign language teaching. Maybe you can say something about that, Nora. What are your thoughts in the background?
Hello.
Hi, Nora.
Hi. I really love this idea because this is something that I have applied also. And now it's so exciting to see it validated in this way, because first we need to teach the children what the meaning of the words or the concepts are. And then we use the context we put them in context so that they can refer to them and make them their own. And that's how they can speak fluently, even if they make mistakes, but they own the language, they own the vocabulary if we work with these three folding. So it was so exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nora. You just reminded me that I was going to say something which I forgot to say in the heat of the moment, which is that this three-stage rhythm is not the Waldorf way of learning. I think it's the way of learning. It's the human way of learning. And a famous book that was published in the 1970s about Waldorf education in Britain was called Common Sense Education. It just makes sense to learn experience, context, ownership. If we do it the other way around, as we're often forced to do, that's when we get a problem. That's when we get blocks and we forget things and we have antipathy that we need to deal with. So I think Steiner is not being particularly imaginative or esoteric. He just calls it as it is when he says it. So thank you for confirming that from a foreign language perspective.
So Jane asked about your book.
Yes.
When it will appear next year, I think, as I understood.
I'm only the editor of the book, I hasten to add. So there are lots of people who have contributed to it, but it's my project, if you like, with the Bund der Waldorfschulen. The German title of the book will be Beziehungskunst. Actually, you're the first people to hear this, because I've just today seen the cover. It will come out in German in about February. And the people who've contributed to it are both people whose names we know quite well. So we've got in it a curriculum for relationship education from kindergarten all the way up to class 12. But there are also some young people with very insistent voices. And there is a coming out guide in it. And there are different really interesting questions, interesting articles on gender. So, and I'm hoping, of course, that it will eventually be translated into English. Okay. Because the English-speaking world tends to be far ahead, of course, of the German-speaking world in this field.
Of course, that would be great. Maybe I put a question, just to a bit of a provocation, maybe, but I'm sure you can answer that. You know, you brought in that idea of that classroom, which is called in Germany bewegtes Klassenzimmer. Is it called moved classroom in English? What is the way?
Moving classroom.
Yes. So I definitely know that there are many people in favor of that. And there are also many people saying, no, this is not the best thing to do. They sit on the earth. There's too much movement. There's too much. And, you know, learning means the body comes into a calmness and something, you know, all the arguments. And you were very much in favor of that. And maybe, can you see the other side too? How do you deal with that? Are the others wrong, so to speak, or what do you think?
So I can see the other side, and maybe in the shortness of the time, what I presented was a very simplified image, because my main intention was about the crucial gesture of the circle as a default learning shape. And I retained this right up to class 8. So right till the last day of class 8. Most of the time we spent in the circle when we were learning things. But the whole idea of the moving classroom is what in English is called horses for courses. In other words, you create the shape that is ideal for the activity that you're engaged in. So if I'm doing geometry and I'm demonstrating things on the blackboard, and I want the pupils to follow step by step in their books what I do, of course, I have to stand at the blackboard and they have to sit at their desks facing me at the blackboard. When I'm telling a story, depending on the age, I certainly want the children to be close to me, but they don't need desks for listening to me telling them a story. So when they're little, we can sit on the ground and they can be comfortable. When they're a little bit older, they can sit around me in an amphitheater. When we're discussing things, again, we're best in a circle. And so we are moving, literally, that's why it's called moving classroom. We're moving furniture 4 or 5 times every main lesson because we do these many things. Every time we do that, we have a transition. The pupils breathe out. They don't ever have to run around the playground to let off steam because they do that in a controlled way by rearranging the furniture. And they can have a little chat and they can have a little drink of water and then we move on to the next thing. So I don't think there is such a thing as too much movement. It depends on the quality of that movement. And of course, the moving classroom provides plenty of opportunities for stillness as well. Right from class 1, I've always moved on 3 levels. I always had tables in my classroom. So we had cushions, we had benches, and we had desks. And we used any kind of variation of those 3 levels to work on. So I think one shouldn't be too tied to what one sees in the neighboring classroom. Just because one teacher has one style doesn't mean that's the way to do it. We all need to find what works for us. And that's the beauty of this approach, that we're no longer tied to the sage on the stage and their auditorium.
I think this is a very important sentence. The last one you see, that be aware that every teacher has a different style. And if this style works with the children and is reflected in everything upon, then that can work.
Yep.
And there is not one system and one didactical method, and
yes.
which is the best one, you know, because it has to fit to the situation, to the topic, and to the children and to the teacher. So
yes.
It's not a medicine to do moving classrooms and then it's working. You have to see how it works in which surrounding.
Maybe I can just add at this point just a small biographical thing, that after 20 years of teaching, when I moved to Germany, I applied to 4 schools, and each of those 4 schools offered me a job. And 3 of the schools said, if you come here, you have to do bewegtes Klassenzimmer, you have to do the moving classroom. The 4th school said, we have the furniture, but it's up to you how you work with it. And that's the school I went to.
Okay. Thank you. So Douglas has a question concerning the role of the teacher in that you can read it yourself. So what is the teacher's place?
Well, a bit of both. Douglas asks, where does the teacher reside in the circle diagram? Or is the teacher in continual motion? Well, the teacher places themselves into the circle. And the pupils are in a particular order. That's important. Everybody knows their space, of course, whether the desks are there or not. We always have a circle order, but the teacher can place themselves wherever they want to in that order, so that, you know, different children get the pleasure or displeasure of sitting next to the teacher. So, but once I sit, I sit. So then, you know, I don't constantly move around. And Vesco asked a question, maybe in connection with that, are the students sitting really with their backs towards the center? Well, yes. I don't know if you've seen this in action, but this is brilliant. A colleague suggested this to me. So we've got the benches in a circle, or the chairs, and the desks are behind. So outside the circle. So we talk about things, we discuss stuff, and then it's time for working in our books, and all they have to do is turn around, and there's their desk, and there's their book, and there are no distractions. Because they're working by themselves, they're not copying from the blackboard. And then when after 10 minutes, when they, here's something we need to talk about, all I have to say is, okay, everybody turn around again. And the focus is there again. And I was very grateful for that suggestion.
Okay, there's Vera coming with a question concerning differentiation in Waldorf teaching.
I can't see it. Can you tell me? Oh, there it is. Yes. How do you think about differentiation in Waldorf teaching? It's so much part of what we do that the question almost implies that you could afford not to. And And of course you can't. In a way, if I say the child is the center of what we do, then of course we differentiate for every child. That's, I think, why we have the main lesson. For example, why we do geography for 15 days. So over those 15 days, every single child will feel at some point, this is for me. And ideally, yes, every English lesson, every handwork lesson, every maths lesson is like that too. We have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack there. To achieve that practically requires a lot, especially if you have 35 children. But education without differentiation doesn't really exist, I think.
Okay. There are no questions so far as I can see anymore. So again, thank you so much for that wonderful lecture, Sven. That was a really good closing of our series of lectures. So I want to just say that we decided to continue with that. We need some time to breathe. We had a discussion around the lecturers and see what could be next topics, what could be maybe an improvement in methods. Yeah, so that a bit more participation maybe from the audience. So we discussed a lot around how to proceed with that. And I think we can have a suggestion maybe next May. We need that time to prepare. So because that has been a lot of work in between. There has been mails, there has been putting in all the videos, and for that it has to be worked with so that they can be presented online. So we need that time now to prepare something else. But I would like, before I go into that, I would really like to thank, first of all, Katharina, who is with us, for doing all the background work. Katharina de Rose, who is a co-worker of mine at Alanus University. Thank you so much for all the work you have done, Katharina. And
you are welcome.
For you. And also, and I'm very happy for that, also to Laura. Is she somewhere here? Can you make yourself visible, Laura?
Yes, I'm here.
I started with Laura preparing that idea. Now she hasn't been able to attend for the last couple of weeks, but she is with us again, and I really hope we can have a good new project next year. And I'm very, very grateful for the help of the two of you. Thank you so much, Katharina and Laura.
Thank you for that. Good idea.
Yeah, and we were discussing in the group what could be topics for the next series of lectures, and there has been several suggestions. First of all, people said maybe it's also sufficient to do it every second week, so not every week, because it takes a lot of time. On the other side, with Christoph with us, it seemed to be like a little Waldorf family after a while, and seeing again every week and 2 weeks would be a bit a long time of not seeing each other. So we will see how we will do that every second week or every week next time, and maybe change the methods time by time a bit. And concerning the topics, there has been many suggestions. I already said that it could be the question of diversity, but there are many other suggestions. Please don't hesitate to write us an email, make us suggestions. Also for people, if there is a very, very good lecturer, someone who we should listen to and has really to say something, please give a recommendation for that. So we are looking around. We are an open framework, an open network worldwide, and we want to have the best people within our series of lectures. So if you have recommendations, don't hesitate to tell us, and I try to include those persons. That would be wonderful. We also got the idea to go, because to go into a specific topic, which is really specific, that should be maybe a bit more the responsibility of every institution, because they know what the students need, maybe in questions of inclusion or other questions, what is the topic of their teacher training. So it will always be a bit more general what we are doing here, because that creates a bit more an open space where everyone can contribute something. Another idea, just to say, is how Waldorf has developed through the years. So what has changed? What are actual developments around the world? How do people work in different ways with Waldorf education? Where are new ideas, new suggestions, so that we are aware that there is a really lively transformation process, and we are aware of the transformation and can take profit out of it. So can profit of experiences of other institutions around the world. So that could be a topic too. We will see. So we are very open, and we will discuss it the next months, and maybe I don't know, Katharina and Laura, how you think about it. Maybe we can start with something around May, a couple of lectures, and then continue in autumn again. Autumn latest should be the next time we have a sequence of lectures again. So we are very happy that you joined us and have been continuously joining us throughout all the lectures. And now we can breathe out and have maybe all of us a bit of a calm time in the Christian culture. Now we have the Christmas days ahead of us, and we have the change of the year and looking forward to the next year. And we really hope that the worldwide situation around coronas will be a bit less tension, a bit more breathing, and a bit more focusing on the essentials of what education wants. This is maybe something which is coming with Corona, that we are distracted of what is the essential and what is not essential. And I always experience this days in between the years. It's something we can focus on what is essential in our life and in our profession. And I wish you, for all of you, I wish you some time and good thoughts and good inspirations during the next couple of weeks. Thank you for joining us, and I hope we can see you all again.
Thank you, Jost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all that you've done, Alanus team. I think it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Sven.
Es war sehr gut. Danke.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you, Karina. Laura.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.